They told us flying was safer than ever. They showed us smiling CEOs, glossy commercials, and promises backed by decades of trust. But what if one of America's most iconic companies quietly traded safety for speed and profit? This is the story of Boeing and how a series of hidden decisions pushed the U.S. aviation industry to the edge. For more than 100 years, Boeing was not just a company. It was a symbol of American engineering. If it flew, and it was made by Boeing, people trusted it with their lives. But behind the scenes, that trust was slowly being dismantled. It didn't happen overnight. It didn't start with a crash. It started with competition. In the early 2000s, Boeing faced a serious threat. Airbus, its European rival, was gaining ground fast. Airlines wanted planes that were cheaper to operate, burned less fuel, and could be delivered quickly. Airbus announced a new aircraft that promised exactly that. Boeing panicked. Instead of designing a brand new plane from scratch, a process that could take years, Boeing made a critical decision. They would modify an old design and sell it as something new. That aircraft would later be known as the 737 MAX. On paper, it looked brilliant. Faster approval. Lower costs. Airlines wouldn't need to retrain pilots extensively. But that shortcut came with a hidden price. The 737 design was never meant to handle the massive new engines Boeing installed on the MAX. The engines were larger, heavier, and positioned differently. This changed how the plane behaved in the air. During certain conditions, the nose of the aircraft could pitch upward dangerously. Instead of redesigning the airframe, Boeing chose software as the solution, a system called MCOS. Its job was simple. If the plane's nose went too high, MCOS would push it down automatically. The problem? Pilots were barely told it existed. MCOS relied on data from a single sensor. If that sensor failed, the system believed the plane was stalling, even when it wasn't. And when MCOS activated, it didn't ask the pilot for permission. It just took control. This wasn't a theoretical risk. It was a ticking time bomb. In October 2018, Lion Air Flight 610 crashed into the Java Sea. 189 people died. Investigators found MCOS had repeatedly forced the plane's nose down. The pilots fought it. They lost. Boeing assured the world this was a rare issue, a maintenance problem, not a design flaw. Planes continued to fly. 5 months later, Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 crashed. 157 more lives lost. Same aircraft, same system, same outcome. At that moment, the narrative collapsed. Countries around the world grounded the 737 MAX, one by one, except the United States. For days, the FAA hesitated. Why? Over the years, Boeing had developed an unusually close relationship with its regulator. The FAA had delegated much of the safety certification process back to Boeing itself. In simple terms, Boeing was allowed to approve parts of its own aircraft. Emails later revealed internal Boeing messages mocking regulators, and even their own planes. One employee wrote that the aircraft was designed by clowns. Another said they wouldn't let their family fly on it. But the planes kept flying. Until public pressure became impossible to ignore, the 737 MAX was finally grounded in the US. Boeing's reputation was shattered. Billions of dollars were lost. But the story didn't end there. Because the deeper issue wasn't just MCOS, it was culture. Decades earlier, Boeing was run by engineers. Safety came first. If something wasn't right, planes didn't fly. But after a major merger in the 1990s, the company changed. Leadership shifted. Finance replaced engineering. Deadlines mattered more than doubts. Internal warnings were ignored. Employees who raised concerns felt pressure to stay quiet. Speed became everything. January 2024, a Boeing 737 MAX operated by Alaska Airlines suffered a mid-air blowout. A section of the fuselage tore open shortly after takeoff. Passengers' belongings were sucked into the sky. A teenager's phone later fell back to Earth, still working. Miraculously, no one died. But the message was clear. The problems were not over. Investigations revealed missing bolts, incomplete inspections, manufacturing lapses that should never happen in commercial aviation. The FAA stepped in again. Production was capped. Audits were launched. Whistleblowers came forward. One former Boeing employee publicly warned that shortcuts were still being taken. Months later, he was found dead. Authorities ruled it a suicide. But questions remain. So how did one of the most trusted companies in America reach this point? The answer isn't just bad software or faulty parts. It's what happens when profit outruns responsibility. When regulators rely too heavily on the companies they oversee. When warnings are treated as obstacles instead of lifesavers. Boeing insists it is changing. New leadership. New safety protocols. More oversight. But trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild. Every time a Boeing plane takes off, millions of passengers still board without hesitation. Most flights land safely. But now, there's a pause. A second thought. A question that didn't exist before. In the race to dominate the skies, Boeing chose speed over caution. And the cost wasn't just financial. It was human. So the real question isn't whether Boeing can fix its planes. It's whether the system that allowed this to happen has truly changed. Because the next decision made behind closed doors could determine whether history repeats itself or finally learns its lesson.